Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
And you'll constantly see people just drive by in our work zone, hit all our cones, and won't even look. Sometimes they won't even look up from their phone.
This is the nation of freedom, but we are also notoriously kind of not very good drivers.
17% say just keep the camera off. What's your perspective on that issue of the camera? If someone's just listening along and they're not going to be distracted by their own face there, does that help?
It might help to some level, but again, I think the bigger problem is just the distracted driving in general, and this is showing the extreme of how deep the problem is.
I'm Sarah Fensky. Last week, an Ohio State senator achieved dubious online fame after he was caught on camera in a Zoom meeting discussing penalties for distracted driving while driving. Yes, you could see him at the wheel during the Senate committee hearing. But that behavior isn't exactly alien to public officials here in the St. Louis area. And that's something that has been annoying Patrick Van Der Tine. He is the executive director of the local bicycle-focused nonprofit St. Louis Bee Works, and he joins us today. Patrick, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So, Patrick, we can all laugh at this Ohio senator because of the sheer hypocrisy of discussing distracted driving while driving, but this bigger issue is not funny to you. Why not?
You know, it just goes to the level of distracted driving that we're seeing out on the streets is the main thing, right? So Missouri is one of two states that still does not have any basic laws around using these mobile devices while operating, a 2 or 3 ton vehicle while they're driving through a residential neighborhood or different neighborhoods. And so it's basically showing you the extreme of the problem.
So what brought this issue, this extreme where we have public officials on Zoom while they're driving, what brought this to your attention?
So we noticed this happening when all the aldermen meetings started going online last year with COVID protections in place. And we started to see it fairly recently or fairly soon into that pandemic. And it just kind of kept going and kept going. We brought it to the attention of a handful of different people of, hey, can we have this addressed? And it continues on to this day.
Have you seen some repeat offenders? I'm wondering if you're comfortable naming some names.
I'm not going to name names, but there definitely are repeat offenders at the board level.
So you're seeing the same people in meeting after meeting. They're there at the wheel.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, Patrick, I know your primary concern is the distracted driving element, but when you're observing these meetings, I'm wondering, are these elected officials even fully paying attention? I feel like part of why Zoom meetings drag on forever is everybody's multitasking. Is that a part of this too, that they're not even paying attention to the legislative debate?
Yeah, absolutely. They're not discussing light issues. We've got a new administration in St. Louis City, and we've got a lot of major problems that are being tackled. And it's really important that we have the full devotion of these individuals to the meeting. And that's just not happening when you're trying to operate a vehicle and you're trying to discuss, the pension of the fire department or the annual budget for the entire city of St. Louis.
Yeah, and, it's not just driving. There's this new Twitter account that all the political junkies in town are way into. It's at STL Politic Clips. They have this footage that showed one of the aldermen getting a haircut in the middle of a Zoom meeting. It feels like the situation is out of control. And if you're listening to this conversation, I'm curious to hear from you. What is the most appalling thing you've seen on a Zoom call? And let's also hear your opinions. Do you think it's okay to drive and Zoom? Does it make a difference if that camera is off and people are just listening? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Or you can send us a tweet at STL on air. You can also email us at talk@stlpr.org. Now, Patrick, we did take a poll on Twitter this morning. We asked whether the practice of Zooming while driving is making our roadways worse. As of noon today, 79% of our respondents said yes, and it needs to stop. 2% said it's fine to multitask. Another 2% said, to my point, it makes these meetings worse. 17% say just keep the camera off. What's your perspective on that issue of the camera? If someone's just listening along and they're not going to be distracted by their own face there, does that help?
It might help to some level, but again, I think the bigger problem is just the distracted driving in general, and this is showing the extreme of how deep the problem is, right? Mm-hmm. Anytime you're trying to multitask, and again, you're operating a large vehicle that's driving through a neighborhood or whatnot. It's just not appropriate to be multitasking. And again, most states have these rules in place. Missouri is working on this legislation, so we will either be the second to last state to enact this legislation, or we will be the last state to enact this legislation that'll prevent stuff like this from happening.
Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, it's not just happening, as we discussed, it's happening with our elected officials. If you were in charge of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, what kind of restrictions would you put in place for virtual meetings?
There's definitely rules that I am not super knowledgeable about. I know that they have to have their face on camera to be able to vote and different things like that. And so I'm not necessarily in that position, to enact those rules or put, even make suggestions on those rules. There's definitely other people that are more knowledgeable about that. But again, it seems fairly common sense, whether it's I'm doing a Zoom meeting for, the nonprofit that I work for, or my wife's doing one for her company or whatnot, that the full devotion is going into that meeting. And again, we're not trying to multitask. We wouldn't be working on multiple projects at the same time while trying to have the same meeting. So the idea that we can operate a vehicle and have a constructive meeting at the same time, it's just not there.
I understand you tried to talk to Aldermanic President Lewis Reed about what you've witnessed here in the city. What kind of reaction did you get to that?
We got no reaction. So we got no response, which was kind of is concerning. I understand again that the aldermen have a lot on their plate right now, but this is something that could be just simply addressed very quickly with the aldermen. Just, hey, we all agree that this is an issue. Let's agree to not do it. We're not asking for them to introduce legislation, in the city for this. We're just asking them to set a better example for everybody that's out there that is knowledgeable about these problems.
I do want to mention that our producer did reach out in this past week 3 different times to the office of President Lewis Reed. She did not hear back from them either. However, this morning, we heard from St. Louis Alderwoman Christine Ingracia. She sits on the city's Community Mobility Committee. That's not a committee of the Board of Aldermen. It brings in various stakeholders. She actually let us know that this topic came up in their meeting yesterday and that it is of concern to that committee. And Alderwoman Ingracia said that some committee members have reached out privately to members of the Board of Aldermen about this. So, Patrick, it sounds like these complaints are rising to the level. It's going to be a question of whether anyone does something about them, but people are trying to make this heard at City Hall and not just you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually on that same committee that she's talking about, and I was the one that brought this subject up to the committee.
So not a coincidence that it was raised.
Not a coincidence, at all. I did ask that, we at least have the aldermen that were on that call, help us address it in whatever way we felt comfortable moving forward. And it sounds like she's open to that idea and trying to, at least reach out to the different aldermen that we're seeing this consistently with, or just addressing it at the board as well.
Okay. I want to go to the phone lines. Cedric is calling, I believe from East St. Louis. Cedric, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
How you doing, Sarah?
Yeah, hi. What's your take on this issue?
I'm currently right now I'm a highway maintainer for the Illinois Department of Transportation, and constantly throughout the day we'll set up traffic control or be out here repairing the roads to make them safer for the motoring public. And you'll constantly see people just drive by in our work zone, hit all our cones, and won't even look. Sometimes they won't even look up from their phone, and it'll make it seem like we're in the inconvenience or just keeping it unsafe and really not paying attention to the changing road conditions out here. And
Cedric, that sounds terrifying. I mean, are you worried that you're putting your life in your hands just by doing your job?
Oh yeah. It's definitely, there's a lot of accidents that happen with not even IDOT, but just construction workers. Like my girlfriend always constantly prays for me to make sure I come home safe.
Oh.
But it's definitely dangerous out here with people not paying attention and constantly on their phones and doing all sorts of stuff on their phones.
So, Cedric, if someone is listening to this program and they have done some Zooming while they're driving, what would you want them to know from the perspective of somebody who's out there?
I would definitely say, please just pull over. Not even if you didn't even care, you weren't even benevolent or altruistic and want to care for our safety. At least just think about it on your own that you're going to get in an accident, you might hit something, you're going to have to pay your deductible. Mm-hmm. Just for your own safety, just pull over and pay attention to what's going on in the front of you.
Cedric, thank you for that perspective. I really appreciate that. And please stay safe out there. I'm going to join your girlfriend in saying a little prayer for your safety. Let's go back to the phone lines. Dave is calling from St. Louis. Dave, hi. You're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, how are you?
Hi. What's your perspective on this Zooming while driving?
Well, my thought is that Americans are, this is the nation of freedom, but we are also notoriously kind of not very good drivers.
Yes.
Yeah. We see that, and it's okay. I'm not shaming anybody here, but the point is that, if you've ever been to Europe, and not to say they have it better or worse than we do, but if you've ever been there, the traffic moves very fast on like really narrow roads, and it's super efficient, and nobody is multitasking when they drive because they understand that it's very important not to hit things or people or other cars or telephone poles or whatever. And so they move fast, they move well, and I just kind of wish that this is not something that can be legislated at all, of course. But I just wish Americans,
have a different state of mind.
I just wish it was taken more seriously. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Dave, thank you for that perspective. Patrick, I'm curious. Dave seems to share your idea that this is a big problem, but he says this isn't something that can be legislated. Would you agree with that?
I would tend to disagree. I think we can quickly agree that this is kind of a ridiculous problem and that our legislators shouldn't have to be dealing with this, right? Again, we have bigger problems that they should be working on right now. But longer term, this absolutely needs to be legislated. Again, Missouri is one of two states left that still this stuff is legal in. So that's an easy one. The construction worker that called in earlier, they have very strict fines for using phones in construction zones, especially in the state of Illinois. Right. So these are all little protections that can go in that can help immensely in changing the behaviors of individuals and how they're using this technology.
Patrick, though, hearing from Cedric, they do have those good laws in Illinois, especially for construction type zones. He says he's still seeing people just zoom by him. Is this also a case where maybe we're going to need some enforcement if we have this stuff on the books?
It's a combination, right? So, I would say I would love to see the comparison of areas that don't have that legislation compared to areas that do have that legislation. I think that, in certain areas you would see a lot more offenses if you didn't have that in place. But we need to use common sense. And we need to understand, going back to what the other caller said of just, we're operating vehicles that are getting larger and larger and larger, getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And we need to understand the consequences behind those, right? And if you look at Europe and you look at other places, they are very strict on the operating of those vehicles, right? If you hit a pedestrian, there's some pretty strict fines put in place. And Missouri definitely does not have any of those in place.
Well, it sounds like there's things the legislature could do. Certainly, in the meantime, our public officials could choose not to drive while they're in the middle of meetings. Patrick Vandertine, Executive Director of St. Louis Bee Works, I want to thank you so much for bringing this to our attention and joining us today.
Thank you for your time.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.